Hello, this is Don Carter with internetofthemind.com. Today we're going to take a look at grief and addiction. I want to start with this diagram, which was created by Vernon Johnson of the Johnson Institute back in the 1960s. The feelings chart represents the full range of human emotions, from the most amount of pain that one can feel to the most euphoria or bliss one can feel. The middle range of the feelings chart represents the area where we are to spend about 80% of our lives. When we encounter a blessing or an important milestone, such as a wedding, a birth, or a new job, we move toward the euphoric end of the scale, maybe spending a few weeks or even a few months there, before returning to normal. When we encounter a loss or something bad happens, such as a death in the family, a divorce, or loss of a job, then we gravitate toward the painful end of the chart and maybe spend a few weeks or months or even a couple of years there before returning to normal. At least that's how it's supposed to work. But in the stages of the development of a relationship with an addiction, we take Mother Nature for granted, and, as we shall see, that can cause quite a bit of problems. There are many definitions of addiction. My favorite is one by Craig Nakin. It says addiction is an unhealthy primary love and trust relationship with an object or an activity that produces a desired mood swing. There are 4 stages in the development of this unhealthy relationship or attachment to an object, such as alcohol or drugs, or to an event, such as sex, gambling, etc. There's learning the mood swing, seeking the mood swing, harmful dependence, and using to feel normal. For the purposes of this presentation, we will use the addiction of alcoholism as our subject. Keep in mind that, generally speaking, these dynamics relate to any form of unhealthy attachment to an object or an activity, that is, to any kind of an addiction. In the first stage, learning the mood swing, we are usually teenagers, sometimes even younger, when we take that first drink. And if alcohol is my drug of choice, then I will love what it does for me, because it moves me toward the euphoric or blissful end of that range of feelings. This is usually a very powerful lesson, because at an early age we discover that we are no longer subject to the whims and moods of life. And if we don't like how we feel, we can automatically change that feeling by taking a drink or a drug. And usually we also discovered that after that euphoric or blissful feeling wore off, we returned right back to normal. So frequently in the early stages of this attachment that we form with this object or activity, there are no real harmful consequences. In fact, things may even be positive, which makes it an even more powerful experience. And we all want to have power over life. We all want to have power over our emotions, to change how we feel whenever we want. Teenagers are especially prone to this temptation or quick fix. In stage 2 of the development of this unhealthy attachment, we actually begin using this new power to change how we feel purposefully. For example, we may start out at the lower end of the scale and remember that all we have to do is take a drink or smoke a joint or eat something in order to move toward the euphoric end of the scale. And since we're still in the early stages of development with this unhealthy relationship, we experience a double reinforcer. Not only do we move from the painful end of the scale towards the euphoric end, we also notice that when we come down from that blissful feeling, we may end up back at the normal feeling, which is better than where we were when we started. In stage 3, harmful dependence, we are now beginning to experience negative consequences while drinking. In other words, as we do our normal thing and take that drink to move toward the euphoric end of the scale, something bad happens, like we get a DWI, or we lose a relationship, or we spend too much money because we're intoxicated. This negative consequence will send us down the painful end of the scale like a slingshot. By itself, this is not enough to constitute an addiction. If I have 1 or 2 negative consequences and then decide I'm drinking too much or drinking irresponsibly and I never do that again, then it's not an addiction. I can tell if it's a harmful dependence when I begin to defend or rationalize my ability to drink normally. For example, I might say something to myself like, I should have eaten something before I went out last night. I wouldn't have gotten so drunk. Or something like, Bill mixes his drinks way too stiff. I'm going to have to stay away from his house from now on. Or, I need to switch from whiskey to beer. Whiskey's just not good for me. In other words, I begin to rationalize and deny my problem with alcohol. Denial indicates that unconsciously I'm unwilling to accept that I cannot drink normally because I'm dependent on alcohol by this time. I may be physically dependent in that my body has adjusted to the presence of alcohol on a cellular level, or psychologically dependent in that I use alcohol to cope with my feelings, or I may be both physically and psychologically dependent. To be aware consciously that I'm dependent on a chemical or an activity is not comfortable for me, so my subconscious mind prevents my conscious mind from knowing that by applying defense mechanisms. For example, rationalization, minimization, projection or blaming, and disarming, just to name a few. And the more problems I have, the more exercise I give these defense mechanisms. Then the more you practice something, the better you get at it. So with addiction, our defense mechanisms become honed to perfection, and we become victims of our own defenses. In the fourth stage, using to feel normal, or using just to function, we can begin to see the wall of defenses we build around all of those negative consequences that accumulate as a result of our addiction of choice. We can also begin to see how the trap is set. In the fourth stage, we spend most of our time in the negative end of the scale, the painful end. At this point, we drink or drug in order to move towards euphoria, but in this stage we're lucky to achieve any sense of normalcy. And when that wears off, we return right back to the painful end of the scale. It is in this fourth stage that it becomes easy to see an addiction, because everything is so obvious. Loss of control, obsession, loss of social support such as families who give up on us, physical deterioration, stomach problems, liver problems, heart problems, high blood pressure, trouble with work, relationships, emotions. And even with all this, the denial is so strong that it allows the alcoholic to continue drinking and rationalizing away his disease. At this point, the drinking is not about feeling good, it's about survival. There are two kinds of pain to be faced in this stage of development. The first is physical withdrawal, and the second is a psychological withdrawal. It's a two-edged sword, and now our defense mechanisms are in place to protect us from the pain of one or both of these. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about the grief process. Sooner or later in life, we all come across grief and loss. Grief is a healthy process that helps us to let go of things that we lose, especially things that are important to us. In order to understand grief, we need to understand love objects. A love object is anything that becomes important to me, whether it be a person, a car, a job, even a way that we look at ourselves. When that something becomes important to us, we attach to it on an emotional level. This attachment is like a rope or a cable. It just gets stronger and stronger over the years. More and more strands weave themselves around each other. When we are losing or have lost a love object, the grief process is there to help us break those bonds or attachments so that we can let the love object go and move on with our lives. Stage 1 of the grief process is denial. The final stage of the grief process is acceptance. Denial is considered a shock absorber for the soul because it allows reality to sink in slowly at the person's own pace. You may have experienced the denial of a loss when you first heard about it and went numb. Or maybe you've seen someone who discovers they just lost a loved one and act as if nothing's wrong. The emotional awareness just doesn't settle in until the defense mechanisms allow it to. So in certain contexts, denial has a purpose too. Denial is only a problem when we get stuck there. Stage 2 is the anger stage of grief. In this stage, we take one step closer to acceptance of the loss, and we don't like it. We may get angry at the object of our loss, at ourselves, in which case it would be guilt, or we may get angry at the man on the street, if that's all that's available. We may even get angry at God for allowing us to lose this important thing. Bargaining is the third stage of grief. We move even closer to acceptance when we begin using if-then statements to figure out a way to avoid the loss altogether. For example, a person might say, if we get into counseling, then maybe we don't have to get a divorce. Or, if I go to treatment, then maybe they'll teach me to drink responsibly. So we can see that some forms of bargaining may be helpful while other forms can be damaging. But the good news is that we have moved another step closer to acceptance of the loss. Grief-related depression is stage 4. Another word for it is mourning, M-O-U-R-N. This is where we give testimony to the importance of the loss of that love object. If we could just go on without any feelings after losing something important to us and blow it off, that might not speak too highly of the attachments that we form. Human beings are built in such a way that they need to demonstrate the importance of a broken love attachment by going through this grief process. The fourth stage is the most painful stage. If you've ever seen a rope or a cable break, you know that it doesn't just snap. It first begins to fray around the edges in the outer strands. They begin to break and unravel. Then we get to the core of the attachment, and it snaps. Stage 4 is right before the snap, when the attachment breaks and we can let go. Acceptance is the final stage of the grief process. This may not be a place of peace and joy, but it is definitely a place where we can begin to experience the absence of pain when we think about that loss. There's one other major difference between the final stage and all the other stages. In those first 4 stages, it's not a real clear-cut process. We can get stuck or jump back and forth from one stage to another. But when we reach the acceptance stage, we have completed the grief process and have broken that attachment while retaining the good memories and even a sense of fondness in our heart. So let's get a visual of what it might look like to go through this grief process. This line represents our normal level of functioning, and the X represents when we first begin to encounter the loss. To move from stage 1 to stage 5 in the grief process can take from 1 to 3 years, as represented by the green line. By now, I know at least some of you are asking, why are we pairing up feelings chart with the grief process? It's a good question. The answer is that grief and addiction go hand in hand. As we've seen earlier, when we go through the stages of an unhealthy relationship, we encounter negative consequences. Those negative consequences cost us something. They may cost us money, relationships, status, opportunities, self-esteem, and many other things that are important to us. But the most important correlation between grief and addiction is the fact that the very first time we slid into denial, the first time we made an excuse or rationalized away our drinking or addictive behavior, we entered the grief process. When we became angry with someone who annoyed us about our drinking or addiction, when we got angry at ourselves, we were in stage 2 of the grief process. Whenever we felt guilty, we were in stage 2. When we entered stage 3, we began bargaining. If I switch from whiskey to beer, then maybe I can continue to drink. If I only smoke pot on the weekends, I can continue to do that. If I only gamble once in a while, I'll be okay. In stage 4, we become depressed because we've hit bottom or we've suffered some serious consequences related to our addictive behavior. Maybe we lost a relationship or lost a job or lost something else that was important to us. It is usually in stage 4 that we hit bottom and become so depressed that we reach out for help. And many people find their way into recovery from here, because they have reached stage 5, which is to accept their disease and the solution to it, which is recovery. Furthermore, in addition to all those losses and all the episodes of unfinished grief, we need to grieve the attachment to the addiction itself. Because remember, addiction is an unhealthy primary relationship with an object or an event that produces a desired mood swing. Primary means that it has become a very important relationship, a love and trust relationship. We love what it does and we trust it, at least in the beginning stages. Furthermore, we will need to grieve the loss of all the things that we built into our relationship with that addiction, such as our playmates, play places, and playthings. As we can see, the initial stages of recovery are difficult because we have a lot of emotional wreckage to clean up. This is why many of us need treatment, sometimes 90 meetings in 90 days. We need to saturate ourselves in the recovery process in order to be able to learn how to let go and how to feel our feelings. The good news is this is excellent exercise for learning how to live life with healthy emotional coping skills. It also motivates us to seek comfort and relief from a power greater than ourselves. Remember the beatitude, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Staying stuck in denial is a refusal to mourn. It's only through facing our grief and losses that we can be comforted and find peace. Thanks for watching.